Everybody listen to We're Not Wizards, because we are the best, and we're not wizards, no matter what anybody says. Goodbye.
Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for August. So, joining me today, there's been, I don't know, it's been, all of a sudden from out of nowhere, we've been hit by several things. There's been a lot of weather. There's been a lot of board games. There's just been a lot of kind of artillery. It can only mean one little thing. I have potentially a tank above tanks coming into view, and he's just raining down on me with his Euro games and his copies of Resistance and his little, it's almost like it's a barrage, basically.
A barrage?
It's a barrage. I've got Neilan Naicker from Boardgame Barrage.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing, Richard?
I'm kind of delighted because it was almost like Callan was kind of like, he was like the test run.
Yeah. So I feel like I like the idea that we're escalating towards Mark because you're peaking with me.
I'd like to think that potentially Callan was the Star Wars New Hope of the board game barrage.
Yeah, I like where this is going. Right? Yeah,
you're the kind of the
dark middle chapter,
rather kind of sharp, quite shocking, but ultimately much loved middle chapter of the game.
Right. Some might say the only good one.
And then at the end, we're going to have furry little Mark.
Perfect.
He's going to be
the people will wonder why they came.
He's going to be like the Ewok of the piece, basically.
That's what we called him, basically. The Ewok of the three of us.
It was a rumor I'd heard, but
right.
And it was funnily enough because I started that rumor as well. So that's always. I thought
it had been coming from that direction.
It was, you let me into your Discord, and that's what's happening, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that. It kind of seems like you've just been sort of like surreptitiously grabbing all of the gossip, all of our sort of secrets, and just using it against us, it seems.
It's not like that. I know it sounds like that. It probably is like that. That's probably an actual kind of true thing. But we don't want to talk. We don't want to talk about what's happening just now. We want to look further back than that. But first of all, the thing that we've got to say is we've got to say hello to everybody who's out there and listening to us for the first time. And that's interesting because obviously you heard the name Boardgame Barrage and you decided to skip Callan's episode to come straight to Neilan instead. He's going to be so angry. I can feel
he's going to love it.
I can feel the hate coming off him just now. I can see me getting kicked from the Discord server.
Right.
I'm going to get barred, or there's going to be some kind of name changes going on. I'm going to be forever known as the horrific kind of wizard, but it's just one of those things. But the reason that we do this is quite simply because there's not enough podcasts out there about board games. I've checked.
Right.
It's impossible to check an Apple podcast and say change everything.
Find them.
I thought I was going to have to dig a pit, cover it with branches, and stick a copy of Concordia over the top to try and entice people, but it didn't work. So there you go. And the other reason that we do this is because I've been a firm... this is where I get sycophantic. I've kind of been a bit of a fan of your guys since I started listening to you with your kind of I know.
That's awesome. Thank you.
It's not. It's just, it sounds like I say that to everybody that comes on. You know, it's surprising I get through all of the podcasts that I supposedly listen to, that I'm such big fans. But, you know, I do like the way you approach things, and we're going to cover that anyway. But we want to cover a little bit about your past, your journey.
How far back are we talking?
I don't know. Potentially.
Okay, well,
I want to start kind of back at the beginning, because where did you first kind of get into the kind of the world of pressed and kind of printed trees? Kind of how were you kind of introduced to them, and kind of like your life kind of grown up and stuff like that?
Yeah. So as honestly as far back as I can remember, we were sort of a board game family. It was we would often play. I have two brothers, so my two brothers and I would play with my mum pretty frequently. But all we had were the classics, you know, like Monopoly, Cluedo, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Pretty much because I grew up in South Africa, and it's not that it was hard to get modern board games. It's just that I just don't think we were really like culturally aware of them. They weren't sold in stores, I would say. So I feel like I wasn't really made aware of anything other than pretty much the basics until Magic the Gathering, which would have been probably my first big hit into like actually getting into the hobby seriously, which would have been around about high school. So I played Magic a bunch through high school and into college, and because the local store in college where we would buy Magic the Gathering cards from, they just happened to have a couple of import board games. That was kind of like me starting to get excited for the hobby, but they were still super expensive. I remember my brother and I would always like I don't know, like Twilight Imperium, and be like, man, this would be cool, but it costed like the equivalent of $1 million or something.
Because it's South Africa rand, isn't it? Is it the rand? Is it still the rand?
Yeah, it's still the rand, yeah. And I mean, the conversion rate is like much worse than it used to be. But even, you know, even the time I was growing up there, just everything ended up being twice as expensive as it would have been, you know, equivalent.
What was it like kind of growing up in South Africa? Were you kind of aware of kind of like the politics and stuff kind of going on at the time? Or was it a case that you kind of, to you, that was kind of like normal life, things were happening, and you were just kind of getting on with it?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate enough to sort of have been at a young age during, as it was basically ending. So I would have been around 8 years old when the first democratic elections happened, when Nelson Mandela was elected. So, you know, I was just on the cusp of really sort of seeing any of the really bad side of it. So most of my knowledge of it is just from my parents. That said, like we grew up in a part of South Africa that wasn't technically part of the country. There were these sort of homeland states, that were, you know, basically separate sort of countries that were like within South Africa, basically. Because my parents are they're a mixed couple. Yeah. My dad's Indian, my mum was white, so it was harder for them to live in South Africa at the time. So I definitely was exposed to it, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Like, I whenever we would travel into South Africa, we were literally crossing a border, handing in passports, and somehow that just like all glossed over me until I was much older.
Do you look back now on kind of like certain things that happened, and at the time it was just like, well, this is normality, and you were looking back now and going, that's pretty questionable, kind of what?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was a bunch of stuff. I mean, that being one of them, like just me not even realizing that we didn't actually technically live in South Africa. And again, like a lot of the sort of, the atrocities of apartheid, like I said, I wasn't really witness to any of that, except in retrospect, except through like, reflecting on the time on the history and that sort of thing. But yeah, absolutely. I think I was sort of blissfully unaware of it because I was fortunate enough to sort of grow up in a town that was very mixed in its population. So I guess I just wasn't super exposed to the worst of it. And I think a lot of that was quite deliberate on my parents' part, to be honest. But yeah.
What was it? You mentioned you went to college. What was it what did you major in? And were you still in South Africa at that time or?
Yeah. So when I went to Cape Town to to the University of Cape Town there to study. I had a really weird sort of track record in that I sort of started studying physics and maths as my majors, and I had no idea what I thought I was going to do with that. I had this idea I was just going to be a scientist, and I don't know what that even meant or what I thought that meant. But just sort of coincidentally, I picked up computer science, and I ended up loving it so much that became my major. So I pretty much ended up specializing in computer science from that point on. Was there any particular kind of side to the computer science? Was it just the kind of the programming side of things, or had a slight kind of creative flair? Had that kind of shown its head during the kind of the time as well? It was pretty broad initially. Where what ended up sort of focusing my attention, especially once I sort of got into my third or fourth years, was I was always much more 3D graphics oriented. So my thesis in my final year was like a graphics project, which ended up shaping a lot of what came after, because that's how I sort of first started making contacts in like the 3D industry and visual effects at local studios in Cape Town. At the time, at least around my second or third year, I knew I wanted to get into video games because I was super big into video games, just like, as a hobby. Yeah. And I think that shaped a lot from that point on of me sort of trying to find a way to get into the industry, which is where I ended up. And how did you end up getting into the industry itself? I mean, were you butting your head across a lot of doors at the beginning, or were you right place, kind of right time kind of person? To be honest, it was definitely the latter. Like I want to say I was one of those people that was just knocking on every single door and sort of pushing myself down everyone's throat. But like honestly, it was just I saw a posting for a studio in Santa Monica, and they happened to be using. They were investigating a 3D software, sort of effects software that I happened to be quite familiar with, just as a matter of course. And it was at a time where this software wasn't that commonly used in games. So it was definitely, I just found the right point in time to apply, and it worked out. And they're a studio that's pretty good about hiring internationally, so obviously that made a huge difference. So are you then upping sticks, moving to Santa Monica? Completely from much. Different, going into the completely different kind of country. Did you, was that an easy thing to do? Because I guess you're leaving your brothers and your mother behind, and your family behind, I'm guessing. Yeah, no, 100%. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Because I mean, exactly like what you said, it was me changing careers effectively. Yeah. In a country, in a city where I literally didn't know anyone. I have a couple of cousins in Texas, but that's pretty much it. That's like literally the only people I knew in the US at the time. And Texas is not exactly close, so it was practically like moving somewhere I literally knew anyone. I think that there's one specific moment I remember, like on the first day I landed in Santa Monica, where obviously because the time difference is about 9 or 10 hours. So it gets to about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I suddenly realized that everyone I know in the world is basically asleep. And it was just this terrifying, like, sort of dawn, thing. Just like, and at that point, I'm like, I've come off the plane, because the plane flight is 24 hours. Yeah. I'm just like drained and dead. And it's like, I literally at that point, like, break down crying, thinking like, what have I done? I've made a huge mistake type thing. Was the company quite supportive in getting you kind of relocated and getting your accommodation sorted out and everything like that? You said they were quite supportive of doing that for you? 100%. Yeah, they were pretty good about. I had accommodation sorted out for the first couple of months. In a place that was literally across the street from the studio. Allowance to get my stuff over. Pretty much anything I needed, they were super good to take care of. Obviously, handling all of the visa issues, giving me the support I needed to get my ID and social security number and all that stuff. Yeah, they were great about it. I think they did this fantastic job of just getting me on my feet pretty quickly. So did you go in with the graphical design
side of things? Were you going in were you starting to show your kind of artistic flair by that time, or were you still, look, I'm the technical go-to guy on how to use this kind of piece of software?
So the interesting thing is, at that point, I would say I was already a little bit of a hybrid, because when I entered the 3D industry, so this would have been back in South Africa, it was purely from the programming perspective. Like, I was just developing software for them.
Yeah.
But I started to pick up the 3D art over the course of that job, and the specific software is kind of like a hybrid of 3D work and programming a little bit. So it's actually almost like it's hybrid software in and of itself. So I'd already kind of like carved out that specific niche of being like, because what I am right now would be called a technical artist, and it's almost literally that. Like, it's a artist that has more technical, more precise technical knowledge as well.
Okay.
So it's kind of what I do right now is a mix of 3D work and still developing tools, basically. So I've kind of been like not stuck in that game, but I've kind of been doing the same sort of thing like even since back then.
So are you like saying, if somebody says, okay, what I need to do is I'm about to have this entire scene is this person kind of creating it's going to be made out of like a big plate of marshmallows, but I need to know how to draw that and make that kind of look convincing. Are you the type of person that will say, well, use this tool here because this'll reflect the light in this certain part of way, but it'll still look like it's covered in ice and sugar kind of thing? Are you the type of person is that the type of thing that you would kind of do if somebody comes to you with an issue? You're able to say, well, if we mix this bit with this bit and this bit, then this will help you get the kind of the texture that you're kind of looking for, kind of thing.
So the specific thing that's sort of not, so the actual graphical look so much isn't my area of expertise, but what mine is having things move in a convincing way. And this is kind of where, I guess, to some extent, the physics, the couple of years of physics I did actually pays off. But it's the way things move in a convincing way. So if that was a plate of marshmallows, it would be getting them to wobble in quite the right way as the plate moves around.
Okay.
Okay. So mostly what this ends up being is if you imagine like a wall collapsing, through an explosion or something, like having the brick and the wood and all the underlying structure like collapse in a convincing way. That's mostly what my department focuses on. Things that move in the world when the player like shoots them or interacts with them or bumps into them. Yeah.
I kind of remember when Half-Life 2 came out and everybody was just going absolutely crazy over how the different kind of the different kind of materials had different properties, and based on how you hit them and moved them, people were like, look, if you smash this piece of wood, look where the wood goes, and it kind of floats on the water if you hit it into the water, and it's like if you push a rock, it does this, and it was kind of revolutionary at the kind of the time.
Totally. I remember that like so specifically because I think for almost anyone that sort of got into the technical side of video games, like Half-Life 2 is it's like a massive inflection point for a bunch of different like cool tech like that. And I remember like just devouring all of their tech videos like even before the game came out.
Were you looking at for inspiration and ideas and stuff like that at the time? I mean, or have you, I take it working on a game, because this is where it gets kind of interesting, is it's not like, it's usually something that takes a number of years. So is there kind of like breakthroughs that you've seen where people have taken kind of normal, stuff that would take maybe kind of a lot longer to kind of make work and render and just get the realistic movement of people continually coming in and just shaking up they talk about disrupting the technologies, but have you seen a general disruption to a lot of stuff that you're doing, of people kind of making it easier to kind of replicate kind of things, or is that down to kind of like more kind of processing power and stuff like that?
No, I think there are definitely sort of specific technical points. So I think Half-Life 2, again, that period of time, or around about the early 2000s, that's when you start to see real-time physics become more and more prominent, and you get a bunch of big companies that's their whole thing is just providing physics engines basically to these games. Like that, I remember being a specific huge revolution. again, like graphical tech around about the same time as well. Stuff like vertex pixel shaders and things like that. There were definitely like specific points. I feel like it's maybe been, I don't know, maybe cynically speaking, it's been a little while since I felt there was like a big disruptive tech. There have been like a few contenders. Like I feel like stuff like virtual reality has had the potential to be that, but didn't quite maybe take off in the way people imagined it would. At least not yet. I'm sure it will get there. But yeah, I think those moments happen, certainly, to the sense that it's like changed the way that people do their jobs easier. I would say like one of the biggest thing that's happened in the time that I've been in the industry is actually very specifically focused on the sort of stuff I do, which is being able to like realistically like simulate physics. So stuff like when I sort of first joined the studio here, sort of doing fluid and water effects was still really hard to do. It was very, very time consuming. There was no way you could realistically get that stuff into a game. And now it's easy. Like we do, I mean, okay, it's not easy. It obviously still takes a lot of very talented people taking a lot of time to do it. But they just push a button and it happens.
It just happens.
No, but it's
just like, why don't you have more ripple effects? Are you just saying people are lazy? This is what you're saying, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. But the thing is, like, it's gotten to the point now where even just like something like someone getting hit, a blood effect would be like a simulated fluid, and that's crazy. Like something that would have been exclusively like an ocean or a big large scale effect is used as a matter of course now. And it's stuff like that's really, really cool to see. So you're seeing like very realistic like smoke simulation and fire in the games now, and it's all because generating these effects have just gotten so much easier in the last 10 years.
I remember, and I'm going to be honest with you, when the Last of Us, which I know that you kind of, Last of Us is one of my favourite games of all time. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you.
And full stop, And one of the things I remember there's a scene in The Last of Us and it's just one of these ways of introducing a puzzle element where they have to cross a part in a kind of like a sewer, and I think Ellie says, "I can't swim," so Joel has to get Ellie on a crate and just start pushing her about kind of in the water.
Right.
And I remember spending about half an hour to 40 minutes just pushing Ellie around in this small expanse of water because of the way the water was kind of reacting and stuff like that, and the way that everybody was reacting. And to me, it was kind of just like the little moments. It wasn't the big, huge, because games around that time, there was a lot of big set pieces going on. There was a lot of big kind of grandstanding. There was very much a kind of an independence kind of vibe. And then one of the things I liked about The Last of Us is there was a lot of stuff where that was just very, very subtle little things, which kind of, things written on a wall or stuff like that. Just the way the lighting was, just the way the winter level. That whole level with just Ellie just kind of going
like how
about.
Sort of subtly, ominous and like oppressive it feels.
Just, and it was, I think it was, it was just absolutely it was kind of fantastic, which is why I'm kind of, did you work, I mean, how much involvement were you in the original kind of Last of Us?
On The Last of Us, you mean?
Yeah.
So, I joined the studio while it was in production, but so I came in originally for Uncharted 3. That was my first game there, but they were at that point in time, and I don't think they had done this. I'm trying to remember. I don't think they had done this at any point before that where they were working on two games simultaneously. So the studio was essentially split at that point between people working on Uncharted 3 and The Last of Us.
Yeah.
But the games were staggered such so that once I finished up on Uncharted 3, I went on to, say, the second half of The Last of Us. So yeah, I was definitely on that pretty solidly for the second half of the project, which is typically when my department tends to get the most stuff to do is towards the end of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a super interesting project, especially coming off of Uncharted 3, because the thing you were describing with these big cinematic bombastic set pieces, like I think Uncharted, that's Uncharted.
That is
right?
Uncharted, yeah. That is Uncharted.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Uncharted 3 had this sense of trying to escalate so much of what was done in Uncharted 2, which was to some extent like one of the first big cinematic set piece games. So coming off of that, where you're blowing up a building every single week and everything is burning down all of the time, to a game that is, like you said, just about the small subtleties, I think that was one of the most. It was one of the most. It was a very specifically profound change, because you suddenly have all these people that are so talented at producing these big moments, and then you have to condense those into these really, really small moments. So how does this wall subtly crumble in a way that's not, it's not because Nathan Drake launched a rocket launcher at it. It's just because of the, the passage of time. And like, as you subtly brush past it, like little pieces just flake off.
Yeah.
There was something that was really, really cool about that. I think that's specific of trying to sort of have big moments, emotionally speaking, but on a much, much smaller scale. I think, like you said, that framed a lot of what The Last of Us was about, at least to me.
Mm-hmm. When you were working on it, was there a general murmur to actually say, damn, this is like kind of really special? Because in terms of critical acclaim that it got, I mean, it rated very, very well and very, very favorably across the kind of the media, the press, and critics in general. But when you were working on it, was there any inkling? Was there any inkling amongst the rest of the staff, yourself? You're saying, well, actually, this is pretty. I mean, Uncharted is pretty cool, but this is taking its place as something kind of slightly differently, slightly elsewhere.
There's this weird thing in game development where a lot of it doesn't seem like an actual video game until very close to the end.
Yeah.
Because for 90% of the time you're working on a game, you're a character that's sort of like jankily moving through pretty much flat gray environments, and everything's a little bit off. Like you hit a button and then things snap, and that's just the reality of it. Like these systems take a long time to come online, and it doesn't all sort of coalesce until the end. So honestly, like if I got the sense that this was definitely something different from a story perspective. This was something that hadn't been done before. Well, not necessarily hadn't been done before, but was very rare. Like a smaller scale, more adult story. So I had that sense. But that said, like a lot of, especially because the work I do is purely visual, I'm often just playing the game without any sound. So I wasn't getting the audio, I wasn't getting the story, I wasn't getting any of the dialogue. And I would only sort of be exposed to small parts of that, like the overall narrative beats of the game. Like genuinely, the ending of the game was a surprise to me until I played it. Literally as it was going gold. So some of that stuff I wouldn't have been super aware of. I obviously could have been if I had sort of tried to play through the whole thing. But what was one of the things I specifically remember is that very close to the end of the project, like in the last couple of months, I remember playing through it. And I remember a lot of people had a similar sentiment. It was like, I'm not so sure about this one. Like, it just doesn't feel like the action doesn't feel fun. Like the melee isn't quite working. And honest to God, like a lot of that stuff only clicked into place in the last few weeks of development. Like at some point, someone just makes a very subtle change, and then everything just sort of comes together. I might be misremembering this, but I feel like one of the things that happened fairly late was there are these enemies in the game that can like instant kill you, and it's like small changes that like tweak the combat in subtle ways, just make it start to feel a lot more deadly, a lot more interesting. So yeah, I've got to be honest, like I didn't think it was going to be the phenomenon it ends up being until like literally the game was final.
And looking back on, it's gone through the PlayStation 4 kind of rehash, like reskin kind of thing, the remaster, and there's also been the kind of the additional kind of DLC. I mean, looking back on it, is it something you're like, yeah, this is, I'm really proud of this. I'm really proud of what this achieved, kind of thing.
100%.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. No, I think it's hard. It's one of the hardest things to do is to play through a game you've worked on and sort of have any appreciable, like, critical opinion of it. Because I'm still, there are things in that game that I still look and I'm like, that could have been done better. I wish I had a little more time on that.
That's what I was going to ask.
Inevitable. Yeah, no. It's horrible. It's because, like, the thing is, and this is purely like selfish perspective, but like, when some people say like, oh, this game is one of the, my favorite gaming experiences. And I'm like, yeah, but did you see the way that little flag is moving on that third level? And it's like, it's not quite reacting the way I want to. And they were like, no, I didn't see that at all. And that's all I can see, Do
you not like kind of sit there and go, but that was Frank that did that. Frank messed that bit up. I remember seeing Frank work on the bit with the giraffes and the flag. And I even said to him at the time, but no, he had to go and have a cigarette break.
Didn't listen. Exactly. That's exactly. All I'm doing is just being mad at every other person in the studio every single time I play it. No, that's not true, obviously. But there is a little bit of that where you're still only seeing the faults. You're still seeing it with a critical eye. I can appreciate the game through the way people have reacted to it. But it's still hard for me to play through it and experience it in anything except showing someone. You know what I mean? Like I can never. It's hard for me to enjoy it for myself.
I have a controversial question for you. Kind of. It's kind of controversial. I don't play video games as much as I used to. And one of the reasons I don't play video games as much as I used to is they don't seem to be finished. There seems to be a kind of a lot of a day one patch, which is almost the kind of the same size. Is that do you think that's just going to become the kind of the norm? Because there seems to be a lot of games which almost seem to be moving to a kind of, we send out the product and then we're going to build on that as we go. I've seen it kind of done very, very successfully, but it seems to be the kind of the games which don't have massive amounts of stuff. I mean, Fortnite, for instance, seems to be going through iteration after iteration. Particular types of games like Overwatch and things like that. But, I obviously, day one patches to me they're just like a mystery, because I came from the Super Nintendo era and the Spectrum game kind of era, and as once you shipped a game, it was impossible to kind of send out improvements because you couldn't patch a game.
Right,
so is that kind of, do you have to, I mean, is it a kind of, I don't know, because it just strikes me as a kind of a weird kind of thing. You wouldn't get that kind of like in board games.
I was just going to say, actually, weirdly, I mean, you do though, right? Because they're putting out, updated components and errata for rules and that sort of thing. I mean, you have to hope that the game sort of works as it was shipped, but you got me imagining what a ZX Spectrum patch would look like them just sending out strips of magnetic tape that you splice onto the cassette, which would be pretty spectacular.
You used to get, and this is going to show my age, but you used to get, you used to be able to kind of do a merge command on a Spectrum game, and what it would allow you to do, it allowed you to select merge, and then when you started the loader on the tape, it would stop it at a certain place, or it would allow you to insert code in a certain place, so you could type up kind of cheat codes and stuff like that, and
so good.
You could insert the kind of the code to the cheats into the game beforehand. Obviously, later on, you got cheat code cartridges for Super Nintendos and Mega Drives, where you would put an interfacing cartridge between the game and the actual console, and it would
like
do
a Game Genie type thing.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Well, first, like, I as someone that did have a ZX Spectrum growing up, as someone that I was saying like didn't have access to a lot of these consoles, somehow my mother had a ZX Spectrum, so that's incredible. We may have had like one of the only ZX Spectrums in South Africa, but so I am super familiar with tape loading errors and all of that jazz.
Wow.
But that sort of stuff is, I want to say, like, it's such a hard conversation, right? Because I think if you were to ask any of these developers that had developed on these old systems, like, don't you wish you could have fixed some of these known problems after the fact? I mean, to me, that seems like a massive improvement. Like, the ability to patch fix this stuff is one of the most incredible things about software right now. Like, we're in an age where your car is getting updates over the air, right? Like, it's one of the most fundamental shifts in this sort of technology, where the product that you receive doesn't have to be the peak of its ability, right?
No.
And I think, like I said, a lot of these games lean into this, like your online, your MMOs. Obviously, they're reliant on the fact that the stuff is just constantly changing all the time. The day one patch thing is tricky. I think the reason why it's become so prevalent is because games got very big and games got very expensive. And the reality is, at some point before the end of a project, you have to say, okay, we're done with this because we have X amount of time to literally manufacture this game.
Yeah.
And because internet at pretty high speeds is as prevalent as, and I know that that's a pretty privileged position, and that's not always true of everyone everywhere in the world, but it's almost like it's a period of time where if you had issues that made it through production, because, once the game goes gold, we don't just, turn off the computers and go home. Like, people are still testing it, people are still playing it. And unfortunately, a lot of these sort of very, like, pernicious big problems rear their heads in the 6 weeks between, like, manufacture and release. So it's just a matter of, well, we could just leave the game as is, but you're probably going to end up with a bad experience for those people that happen to stumble upon these major issues. So it's just, it's one of those things that I get consumer aggravation towards it, but it's ultimately better for the product, in my opinion.
It's moving away, I think, from, as you say, from a fixed game to a movable feast. I mean, I remember playing Bloodborne on the PlayStation, and I remember the first version of the game that came out, I bounced off it heavily because the loading screens were terrible and they took ages, and it just was a completely different experience. You go back now and there has been patches that have gone through and improved the game. Some games use patches almost like seasons. I mean, like, let's face it, looking at Overwatch and things like that as well. I take it now, try to bring this back round to things again, which is what we're meant to be talking to, but this is far too interesting anyway. Did your game employee co-workers become your friends then? I mean, with you being in the middle of nowhere, surrounded I think obviously by like-minded people, did a lot of these people kind of help almost become like a substitute family for the family that that were still back in kind of South Africa? Yeah.
I think definitely from that perspective, like when you describe it as a family, like absolutely, because one of the things, when I came in at the tail end of a project, and everyone, there's this camaraderie that happens just over, as you're trying to finish a game. Yeah. That said, I came into the studio pretty young, so and I would say the people in my department at the time weren't kind of, we're all sort of either were married with kids, so were in different stages of their lives. So I struggled, and also at that point in time, like I still am extremely nerdy, but much more introverted, much more socially anxious person. Mm-hmm. So I struggled honestly for the longest time to integrate into just going out and meeting people and making friends. I probably could have. I mean, certainly the studio would have been the right environment to try do that, but I just wasn't in the right state of mind for it in the first year. But that said, one of the things I sort of specifically tried to do after that game shipped was force myself to do that, to go out, to meet people, and somehow circling this back around to board games is like that was my first friend group, was me just deliberately saying, okay, I'm going to go find a meetup. Like I said, I'd seen these modern board games in South Africa. I'm going to try find a group of people to play them with. I didn't know anything about the hobby at the time. I was like, so that was my first sort of foray into the hobby, was just literally showing up at a meetup and saying, hey, let's play some board games. And those are all still my closest friends right now.
Did you go pre-packed? I mean, did you go out and kind of have a pile of games to bring in with you?
No, nothing. I didn't have anything. Like, cause even the I had maybe one modern hobby board game that I didn't bring with me. It was like the Warcraft board game or something, the Fantasy Flight one, and that's not a good game. But so I didn't bring that with me. But I just showed up, and because they were quite willing. My friend Dean, who sort of hosts this game night, that where I met Kellen and Mark eventually. He was excellent about just sort of, I didn't know anything, and he was just, here are all the games. If any of these look cool, we can teach you them and teach you how to play them. And I didn't know what to expect, and a large part of that was me discovering what board games could be, I guess, because the Resistance, I think, was a good early example of something where I was like, wait, what? There's like next to nothing here except us shouting at each other for half an hour. This is amazing. So yeah, it was an education and a surprise all at once while I was making, really, really good friends.
How quickly did you and say like Kellen and Mark did you meet them both at the same time, or did you meet one before the other kind of thing?
So I'd met Kellen first, and I want to say, I'm trying to remember the exact time on this, but it was definitely Kellen first, but maybe by a year or two. It's funny like how hard it is to actually remember specifically, but so surprisingly, even though this board game group was obviously a bunch of really great nerdy people, there weren't that many people that were into video games that much. So Kellen, being someone who was also a very avid video gamer, we just sort of like clicked pretty quickly. So we were pretty close at the game group at the time, and then Mark, I think, shows up maybe a year or two later. And I mean, if you've ever spoken to Mark, I think you'd be sort of hard pressed to meet anyone that has a deep knowledge of the hobby, and because he has literally every board game ever made somewhere in his garage.
That's why I'm kind of bringing. He's the kind of, as I say, he's the Return of the Jedi special with all of the special effects.
Exactly. So yeah, and I didn't at that point, like Kellen's also someone that is more invested in the hobby than most people. Like he's scouring at that point in time, and still constantly is scouring Board Game Geek for unheard of gems and that sort of thing. So they obviously sort of connected just on their deep knowledge of board games. And at this point in time, I'm also getting deep into the hobby, buying a lot of my own games, and being one of the few people at that point that's sort of trying to bring new games, because our friend Dean, who hosts it, has this massive collection. So we never felt like we were wanting for games. But at that point in time, the hobby is just like blowing up, 4 or 5 years ago. And I think the three of us just very quickly connected, it just in terms of like wanting that really deep insight into like the behind the scenes of the hobby and just enjoying playing games with each other, honestly.
Yeah, I kind of get, it's really funny because when you listen to the show, you guys are quite willing to be quite abrasive to each other. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like the way that a pack of wolves would play internally within the pack, that you snap and you bite at each other occasionally, and you have kind of like a little bit of rough verbiage. But if somebody else came in from outside the pack and started, say, saying something nasty about Kellen, I got a really kind of gut feeling that everybody would kind of like turn around and just tear strips off this person. So you kind of get, it's kind of like you guys, obviously there's a lot of respect kind of flying around with you guys, because I don't think that you can sit and have the level of discussions that you have without there being a bit of respect kind of kicking about. I think it's obviously you guys are kind of hung around, and it's not a case that, it doesn't sound like you guys are like a couple of people that got together to record a podcast. It's a case that you guys had been hanging about for a while and then said, well, the podcast is probably the next best thing to do.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. Because I think the way we remember it so much is that when the way we would play games would be just because I think Kellen and Mark were more naturally competitive than I would have been at the time. But it's hard not to play a game with them and so just get that same want to bite back, as you said. So I think our games would typically just evolve into us being snarky with one another and just snipping at each other in the game. And that was always just super fun and super funny because it was backed by this, like you say, a mutual respect. We knew that we liked and respected each other, and it meant that we could have those sorts of interactions. I mean, obviously at various points in time, there are hurt feelings, but it's all in this mutual understanding, hey, if this happened, we're still friends at the end of this. You're never going into any of these incidents thinking of this is going to break the friendship. I can't imagine that ever happening because of this, a mutual understanding. And as far as that sort of evolved into outside of board games, we ended up just talking a lot. We would end a game night session and just be sort of talking about specific things in the hobby or specific games or specific mechanics or designers. And I think we all just got the sense that we were having fun doing it. We were having fun talking about it. So it seemed, and this is maybe arrogant to say, but it seemed like it would be easy just to turn on the microphones and talk and record that. And we were like, well, people will want to hear this, right? And, that's definitely, in retrospect, a little bit self-involved. But I mean, there's something to it because that's kind of what we do. We just record us gathered around a table, talking about games. And I think the thing is, a large part of the appeal is exactly that, it sounds like three close friends just talking around a board game table because that's literally what it is.
Do you feel... Okay, well, two parts. Were you surprised at how kind of quickly a lot of people kind of embraced the show? That a lot of people kind of went, yeah, this is good, I'm enjoying this. Were you surprised in the kind of the uptake and the number of people that started kind of tuning in?
At various points, definitely, because there are... if you look back on sort of the download sort of history of the podcast, there's a slow growth initially, and then there's really good convincing spikes. And every time one of those happens, you sort of have the sense oh, maybe that we're onto something here. And some of those are the first time we're mentioned independently on Reddit, and there is this kind of surprise. It's oh, this is resonating with people. There is maybe something here that isn't being done in the same way, and I would be hard pressed to describe exactly what that is. But I think it's definitely been surprising. But like I said, it's not been this constant basking in our glory or anything like that. We just have these moments where. So, for example, the first time we were recognized at all ever at a convention was just this. It was this. We were just all dumbfounded by it. The idea that anyone would have done that. And then one of the things that happened at Gen Con is Kellen and I are walking past someone who spins around and says, "I recognized your voice." And it's a really bizarre thing, but it's super gratifying, and I would say definitely surprising. It still doesn't seem like something that really makes sense. But yeah, it's not like we're not at a level of fame or anything like that where it hasn't gone into our heads just yet, I don't think.
I've seen Discord. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I know, but we say that, but at the same time, I mean, I guess the second part, because you got mentioned by Shut Up and Sit Down, and they said, "Oh right, you guys have got to get checked out," and then the next thing, you're being invited to Shucks, which is the coolest thing ever. And I'm not jealous or bitter at all. I've learned to deal with that side of things. You know, how loved and how popular you are, that's fine. Do you feel under pressure now to expand on the level of content that you have? Is there a kind of, because I do see this again and again, is that somebody will grow and then you'll see them starting to do all different types of content. And the next thing you know, they're going into videos, and then they're going into written stuff, and then they're doing additional kind of podcasts, and then you see them going, I need to take a break, I need to slow down because it's kind of too much. Do you feel currently with things going the way that they are, that you do need to start kind of producing additional content, or are you actually saying, guys, we've got the numbers, we're gaining the following, they'll like us for what we're doing, let's just continue doing that kind of thing? Yeah,
I think there's a lot that sort of factors into this. I think if you were to ask Kellen specifically, for example, like Kellen has always been the driving force of, what's the next big thing we can do? He's one of the most motivated, growth-oriented people I know, and I think that he's been the largest sort of driving force in us pushing forward. And he does ask a lot of those questions, which is like, what is the next thing that we can do that will help us grow as a product, as it were. But the flip side of that is he's also super adamant, and we all are. We're adamant about the idea that if we know we cannot deliver something to what we would think is an acceptable level of quality, we're not going to do it. So obviously, the video thing comes up a lot. We have exactly, we have 5 or 6 videos on YouTube that are just recordings of the podcast. And it's a lot of work to be quite honest. Like, video is, such a step up from audio in terms of the amount of preparation time you need to get lighting right, and to get the quality to look good, to record seamlessly without any issues, to edit especially. And the thing that is hard, which I think is the second side of this, is that I don't think anyone in this industry on the media side is, they're not exactly quitting their day jobs to do this. And with the exception of a handful of people. So there is always a limited amount of time and attention that you can do it, unless you're going to lean 100% hard into it. All three of us are working regular jobs in addition to the podcast. This is not something that we can even remotely consider approaching full time. And I think it's a pretty big factor into where we want to focus our attention. That said, I think it's something that we're constantly are talking about. Like, we want to try do more with video, with either streaming board games, putting up video content that's maybe independent of the podcast. I wouldn't say it's because of like a pressure to do it, because I think the podcast is still our strength in terms of everything else that we've done. It's just about finding the right way to make that something sustainable that we can do without it infringing on our personal lives, and still be able to produce it at what we would consider like an acceptable level of quality. So we're definitely like thinking about that sort of stuff. We just have no definite plans as yet.
Yeah, I think it sounds strange, but the people that I know that are really, really good at doing this content creation as a hobby are usually really quite good at what they do in their day-to-day job, because they've naturally got a kind of a talent for kind of where they are. So the barrier for them to kind of move to being full-time all of a sudden becomes incredibly higher, because it's like, well, I've got to match this kind of level of income, which makes it, in some cases, it just makes it a pipe dream, and it does kind of push it back down to kind of being a hobby. And I think you've also got to have a huge number of people kind of interested in what you're offering as well. I think more than what a lot of people will ever achieve, not because they're not good, just because the kind of the board game fandom in relation to other things isn't
right. It's not there yet.
It's just not there, and it's not that they're not there. I think there are people that are doing it, but I think that there's not enough people doing that side of things, and you know what I mean, as in they're willing to say, right, I'm going to jump in and support these people. There's still an awful lot. We've got a lot of people who love our content because they don't have to pay for it, kind of thing. And I know of kind of successful podcasts where there's been backlashes when they try to monetize certain parts of their product, and people have said, well, we're used to having that for free, and if we are paying for it, we expect it to be the highest of the highest because we're kind of giving you money, kind of thing. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword. I'm just going to keep doing this until I speak to everybody that's ever been involved in tabletop. I think that's my kind of way forward.
So once you've gone through all 3 board game podcasts, then that's it.
That's it done. I think what I'm going to do is Mark is going to be my last ever episode.
Right.
I think I'm going to finish it off with the actual Return of the Jedi music with Luke.
Right. Every story has to have some sort of like downward trajectory to the the parabola.
Exactly. Well, pretty much kind of thing. Is there stuff that you would still like to kind of do with what you're doing just now? I mean, if kind of like would you like to kind of do if time was not, if somebody said, okay, I'm going to give you 2 weeks and I'm going to give you $25,000 and you can just go crazy and stuff like that. If money and time wasn't an object, is there a certain kind of project that you would like to do in terms of content creation for the board game kind of thing? Or are you just happy kind of, look, the podcast's here, I'm enjoying it, I don't want it to become a job kind of thing?
I'm sort of halfway between. Like, I'm always excited for like what could be the next thing. I think one of the things that we've spoken about a lot, and we think that we could make pretty successful is like we said, just like live, recording the podcast, having that be something that maybe gets live streamed that people could sort of like chime in on, in real time. I don't know how viable that is, but it's something that we're investigating. In terms of like other board game content, I'm not really sure. I think I would like the idea of us, maybe recording more of our plays, because I think, like I said, one of the things that characterized us even before the podcast was having that sort of like that energy and that fightiness, like even in the way we play games. And I think that would be something that people would enjoy watching, quite honestly. But streaming setups, especially for board games, are a logistical nightmare in terms of camera placement, and you have to have one that's got a good view of the board game, and you have to have some way to like switch between them. So I think that would be it. If I had my $25,000 in 2 weeks, it would be creating like a camera environment where I could just flip a switch and have a board game streaming setup. Because as it is right now, like I said, this is still we're just operating from a room in my place, and I sort of have to move things in and out of the way every single time we do anything. Having a dedicated space where we could just record and play games and sort of broadcast that to the world, I think that would be fantastic. I'd love to get us to that point.
I've seen one app called Vorpal Board, which I think allows you to scan everything and things like that. And I'd be interested to see. I think that could potentially be an interesting thing to kind of help it. Are you guys planning on getting kind of more guests on then? Because I noticed you had, I noticed you've had Paula Deming on, who stole my colour tank, raging. I've actually gone for indigo now, so you're
going to reserve that colour.
I am going to try to.
I think we're definitely hoping to. It's one of the things that it's more of a logistical problem, just because the one thing that we were quite adamant about is, because one of the things the thing we did with Paula, which I thought worked especially well, was just literally getting her into the room and saying, you are now on the Board Game Podcast, you are one of the co-hosts, you've always been here, we're going to turn on the microphones and hit record. And that's not always an easy entry point for everyone. But yeah, we're definitely hoping to get more guests on. That's for sure.
Have you? But I mean, Paula's naturally. I mean, the content that they're putting out at the moment is outstanding.
She's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely,
she's fantastic.
Have you seen the newest one where she just like ribs on a bunch of different content makers? That's super good.
Yes, I absolutely hated it. I went around pretty much drop kicking puppies. I was so annoyed, and I went, look at this person, they're so absolutely
How
talented
they are, yeah, exactly.
How could they be any more talented? So, jealous, slightly. Yeah, a lot, pretty much. There's that kind of thing. But it's just, I mean, but we need something like this in the board game space. We need to move away from, I think, people standing in front of boxes and talking about stuff. And that's not a slight on anybody that stands in front of boxes and talking about stuff. But I think we're potentially at that place where, we need to, we're welcome to that. We're open to that. And I think people are looking for that kind of thing, which is why when you get, Paula and Kiki doing the box flip video, everybody went absolutely mental for it and thought it was fantastic. And when Rodney just did the box flip outtakes, and I think people are looking for that kind of comedy, and comedy is really, really difficult to do in video format. It either works or it kind of dies.
Totally.
Have you listened to Death by Monsters yet?
I have, yeah. So, we made a point to, because I think it was pretty much, there were only like a couple of episodes at the point that Paula came on the podcast. So I made sure to like listen to all of that at that point. It's a really good show.
Again, yeah, absolutely, yes, but absolutely.
But again, like, exactly. But the thing with that, like you say, it completely lives and dies on like the charisma and the personalities of the people hosting it, and all three of them are so good at it.
Yeah, I mean Matthew's just funny.
Yeah, but funny and annoyingly personable, and just they're great.
I don't know. I feel the rage building inside me. I'm just like...
That's the worst part, right? Is when you see someone that's so talented and they're also a nice person. And it's
I've met Matthew Jude.
Yeah, no, we did too. And he's horribly charming.
I wanted to hate him. I met him at Aircon, and I went, first of all, because I've spoken to him on the show, and I went, first of all, I like your voice. Secondly, you're not a bad looking chap. And it's like I'm walking on here, I'm going to shake your hand, and you're going to say something that's make me going to go, yes, hallelujah, he's an actual asshole, but he's not. And he's really, really nice guy.
Yeah.
It never happened. He was a charming, pleasurable, just a nice guy. And, that is, I'm screaming internally while I'm talking to him at the same time. It just doesn't kind of make it. But yeah, Death by Monsters, check it out. But in terms of yourself, I mean, at the moment, obviously with the board games, there seems to be like 20 million kind of board games kind of out and about. Is there anything that you're kind of wanting to get your hands on, that you're wanting to kind of get to the table?
So if we're talking about looking ahead, and I guess it's actually not that far off now, I think like a lot of people, I sort of went on that Tapestry binge with the way that Jamie Stegmaier has been sort of like doling out the content and the videos for that. I don't want to say I'm skeptical about some things. I am very excited to play it. Like there is something that Jamie does, which I think is pretty rare in this industry still, which he is very good at creating exciting moments in kind of just in board game media. Like obviously the sort of the hullabaloo of Wingspan was kind of second to none in this industry, and the way that he's been sort of doling out sort of content for Tapestry, it's just got people talking about this one board game in a way that I haven't seen pretty much since Wingspan. I think those big exciting moments are so few and far between that I'm all ready to get sort of like just all aboard the hype train for that, basically. But having now sort of like looked at the rules and sort of looked into what it's about, I kind of love civilization games, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, Me too. You know, he's another one to put in the pile. Jamie, stop it, kind of thing, basically.
Stop being so talented. Other than that, I don't know. I'm sort of looking around my room because I definitely have games that are like sitting on the floor here that I would like to get played. But nothing that's jumping to mind. I'm still I'm very close to the tail end of a Gloomhaven campaign that I would like to see how that all wraps up, because we're now 30 something missions in and it's all coming to an end. So that's exciting. But I think the thing that's become apparent is that there's always something new every other week, whether you want it a lot. I think there are a couple of like Kickstarters that are hitting soon that I'm almost certainly not going to be able to get to play, but would like to believe I'm going to.
Yeah, Kickstarters are quite. I've not fallen out of love with Kickstarter. I'm still excited by Kickstarter, but I'm kind of hedging my bets. I'm backing less and kind of looking more and seeing kind of how things, kind of the hype dies down after the fact, basically. But we shall see. I did play, however, for the first time. I played Super Rhino Hero Battle today.
Oh, nice!
And it's brilliant.
It is, yeah. I'm actually. It's funny. We just recently spoke about dexterity games, and I think that one slipped all of our minds. It's so fun.
I just loved it. Me and my son. He got up at his usual ridiculous o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I brought it back from Tabletop Scotland, where I was at yesterday, and I said, well, we'll play it. And he went, okay. And he says, how do you play it? And I was like, well, here's the rule book. And of course, the rule book's in multiple languages. So it looks about 30 pages pages thick. But no, we were up and playing it, and we must have played it about 5 or 6 times. And it was just absolutely fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. So it was cool. So that's it. Apart from that, it's just the usual. I'm just waiting to try and get some more games to the table that I've got already, and trying to, curb my fear of missing out, which I think kind of affects kind of all of us.
Right, all of us, yeah. How do you feel in general about this? Because this is one of the things we sort of talked about really recently, and that we talk about this pretty frequently, and that one of the things that's kind of a problem, it seems like it's becoming a problem in this hobby, is that the expectation with any single game that you buy is that you will probably only play it like 2 to 3 times. How does that... Is that something like bugs you, especially?
I think what I've started to do is try to get games kind of played more. I think, and sometimes it's like, I think if we did a direct, going back to kind of video games, if you did a direct comparison about the number of hours you were likely to sink into like a $40 video game over a $40 board game, I reckon the comparison would absolutely terrify people as to how little value they're actually getting out of their board game collection.
For sure.
Because I mean, I say, for instance, there's games I would quite easily put 40, 50, 60 hours in again and again and again. The entire Dark Souls series, I would, if there is 700 hours on that, and it must have cost me the best part of like about £30 or about, $35 at the time. Yeah. Whereas, I've got copies of other kind of games that are like, GKR heavy hitters, which I've probably got to the table about 3 or 4 times at the most. Mm-hmm. And each of those games was only about 2 hours long. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, because
it is, because video games, even if they're on the 7 or 8 hour end of the spectrum, like most people would tell you that that's bad value for money, and then like you said, like that doesn't compare to like how little you generally get out of a same priced board game.
It's just, I think it'll get to the point where there will be people that will, after spending kind of like $100 on Kickstarter games again and again and again, I don't think that's particularly a sustainable market.
Right.
I think you'll get to the point where especially as kind of exchange rates go the way that they're going. Mm-hmm. I mean, for us at the moment, the exchange rate for us is absolutely terrible. It is almost like it's not too much off a kind of a it's just almost comparable directly with $1. I mean, it's not close, but it's certainly worse than it used to be. And now $100 game is kind of creeping up towards being 85, 87 pounds, which does make a huge difference because it used to only be 65 pounds. So the comparison wise, it wasn't like an awful lot. And it's just that whole kind of expense thing. And then knowing that I'm going to have to wait 2-3, sometimes you get a Kickstarter and you're waiting 2-3 months before you even play it once you get everybody together. Because I think there's a lot of people that want to just sit down with a game that they've played before, get it to the table and crack on. And I think there's a lot of groups where you see there's the rule people and you just see a group of 4 people sitting around a table with one person kind of thumbing through the rules, try to teach everybody the rules as they go. And I think people are getting a bit bored of that, So
totally. And it's something that seems very specific to Kickstarter, where they're just these really big box productions that are a pain to get to the table, and B, don't have overly complicated rules that you typically, because I mean, I have a couple of examples like this. So the Nemesis, this sort of alien cooperative game that came out, it's a massive amount of content. The rules are kind of just not bad necessarily, but it's quite an overly complicated game in some ways. And it's a game that I want to play more of, but then just literally the idea of me thinking about, okay, I would have to get the 2 people I knew that liked to play it in the room with me at some point, to set up this massive game and probably relearn the rules so that I can reteach it, because God knows none of us remember how to play it. It is such a weird thing where, on the other hand, we could all play a game. We could play 3 or 4 games that we know and are familiar with, even if it's not a game that we played a bunch before, but the rule sets are not that convoluted. I do think that Kickstarter is probably due for some sort of, rude awakening, I guess, in terms of how many of these big scale projects there are and how many, like I said, are even sustainable in the long course of things.
Yeah, we'll see. I think especially the if this trade war keeps on going, I think we'll see a massive hit on kind of things starting to come in, and then people that thought they were spending $70 on a game are going to realise that they're going to end up having to stick an extra $25 on the top of that.
Right.
And I think that might kind of burn a couple of people as well. But I don't know. You never see. There's always going to be the crowd. I mean, I keep thinking that, this is the year that Kickstarter kind of levels out a bit, and then there's always a campaign that's hitting like $6.5 million, $8 million, $10 million, and you're just like, well,
maybe not.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So it's all fun. For people who haven't listened to your wonderful podcast, the Boardgame Barrage, before, do you want to just give people a quick kind of the elevator pitch on who you are, what you talk about, and why they should listen?
Yeah, sure. So I guess in summary, we are a podcast of three close friends, myself, Mark, and Kellen, who met each other just playing board games with each other, sort of found a commonality in our mutual love of the hobby and enjoying being sort of snarky and snippy with each other in a way, in a friendly, jabbing sort of way. And we translated that into a podcast where we're pretty direct about sort of calling people out on their relative tastes. So we're pretty fighty. If people have opinions that we think are bad, we will generally call them on it. And it's a fun, I would say, a fun sort of feisty podcast that is pretty much just us arguing about board games, talking about the stuff that we've been playing. The other thing we typically do is we sort of dive into, I want to say, maybe potentially like the more philosophical side of the hobby, like the dangers of collecting, the way you would sort of interact with game groups and sort of what that means. So we tend to have like a feature topic, which is some sort of avenue of the hobby that we just want to sort of discuss in depth. But yeah, in general, we're just talking and chatting and laughing about board games.
And it's very, very good. And I just, and sometimes I listen and I laugh, and sometimes I listen and I cry because I realise that you're better than us. But you can't have it all. If people want to keep an eye on where you are on the internet webs, where do you exist on the internet webs? How do we find you?
So the podcast you could pretty much get anywhere. I think any major podcast outlet. So Apple Podcasts, Google Play, that sort of thing. Our website is boardgamebarrage.com, so you could find links to the podcast there as well. And we have a YouTube channel, which it doesn't have a whole lot right now, but we're hoping to get more into. I think anywhere you search for Boardgame Barrage, you should find us in some form.
Excellent. I will make sure that these links go in the show notes so that we've got notes to show. If you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, it's quite simple. Go to the internet web, search for We're Not Wizards. You'll find us on Twitter, you'll find us on Facebook, you'll find us on Instagram, you'll find us on our blog, which is we'renotwizards.blogspot.com. You'll find us on our website, which is we'renotwizards.com. You'll find us all on the podcast catchers. Some of them have got the word pod, some of them have got the word cast, some of them are clever and have got neither, like Player FM. But you will find us there. You'll also find us on Apple Podcasts, but due to the fact that Apple have decided to destroy their own category system, the joke that I have been doing for the last 350 odd episodes no longer applies. However, if you are a person that does like your nostalgia, you can still go there and give us a rating or a subscription or a review. If you are going to be giving us a rating, don't give us 10 stars because it makes us big-headed. But don't give us 1 star because it makes us cry. Give us something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. It's just a little bit average. But the person who's not being average is rather wonderful, rather fantastic. Neilan from Boardgame Barrage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. There are only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Neilan?
I'm pretty sure I'm not.
Yay! That might be. And the other thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Neilan. Say goodbye, Neilan.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful. Episode 2 is out. But until the next time, goodbye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.